Hello and welcome to another episode, video, YouTube, whatever you might be, and wherever you might be watching this. This is a topic that we actually get asked a lot. Should you start your own podcast or should you just focus on being a guest? Now, today I want to kind of go over both sides of the equation and truly, drum roll please, the answer is both. So we're going to go over like the pros and cons of starting your own show versus actually being a guest on others. We'll talk about why both options really do serve different purposes because it depends on what your goal is. Just as with anything in life and business, depending on your goal, we then work backwards and say, okay, this is where you would likely start if I were you. And I want you guys to leave here today being like, okay, how do I want to implement this into my strategy? What's most important in this current moment? How can I do both effectively, efficiently, and all of those things? So if you are new to the visibility on purpose or visibility era world, my name is Bridget Aileen Sicsko. I am a publicity expert. I'm a former publisher. I've been a podcast host and really an interviewer since 2017. And it's really funny. I do want to bring us back down memory lane because this is quite funny. In my opinion, one of the first interview things that I ever did, I had a Facebook group. I was teaching yoga at the time. So my whole journey started with leaving my career at Yelp. I was in advertising sales, phone calls, really cold phone calls, really rough. I ended up leaving that and deciding to quit my job to become a yoga teacher and study Ayurveda. Now, we'll talk about what those things are another day. But I decided really quickly that I wanted to have some sort of online presence. And for a while, I had been posting my like healthy food recipes on my Instagram. It was called Blissful Bridget, was my Instagram at the time. My website was Blissful Bridget. I had a podcast group or a Facebook group called the Blissful Purpose Tribe. And one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to interview people inside there called the Share Your Light series. And I wanted people just to share like a little bit of their journey, a little bit of their experience. I knew storytelling was so profound and so impactful, and I wanted to interview people on that. So 2017, I started interviewing people. Now, by now, I have conducted over 400 plus interviews. I've interviewed celebrities like Jim Quick on live stages. I've done 150 plus episodes of my own show, which turned into, Blissful Purpose Tribe, to a podcast called Unbound, to a podcast called The Gathering Movement, to a podcast called She Builds Empires, closed that down to start Visibility Era with Lydia. And now we have over 70 episodes there. I used to interview all of my past clients. It was a whole thing. All of my publishing clients, I wanted to interview them. I wanted to hear their story. So I've done quite a few interviews in my days. I've also been interviewed probably between 50 and 100 times by now. I've been on Home Goods, like live TV. I've done a bunch of interviews on podcasts, a bunch of panels, in-person things as well. So I've seen both sides of the story, which I think is helpful, and both sides of this equation. And that's where I come from for our conversation today. Now, I started actually listening to podcasts in 2015. I was living outside of Jersey City, which is right outside of New York City. So if you don't know that, Jersey City is right on like the New Jersey side. I hail from Jersey. And then you have New York City and you have, the five boroughs. You have all these areas outside of Manhattan. So I just quit my job at Yelp. And I was really starting to go on this like soul searching journey. I was listening to podcasts like My Seven Chakras, the Sahara Rose podcast. I'm forgetting what her show was actually called, and a few others. But I really loved listening to interviews because it was such a great way that I could learn something new while walking along the Hudson River. There is like a beautiful walking path between Hoboken, New Jersey, which is just north of Jersey City, and then you have Jersey City, which is south of Hoboken. And then to the east is New York City. So I was able to take these walks during my days. I was listening to my podcast and I had a lot of free time during that time because I was in between jobs. I just quit my corporate job, actually got a bartending job on something called the Willy Wall in Manhattan. It was a floating barge, one of the best jobs ever. I could talk about that for a long time. But I think this was the case for a lot of people. During this time, they started to shift away from like reading books, although I'm still such a bookworm. People were commuting and they had less time. They didn't want to bring a physical thing. So that's where you see Kindle really come in, as well as podcasts. Podcasts like really, really blew up because I think it was one of those first ways that someone who was nobody could like have their own show, and you were basically your own media company. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum, and I want to talk about today how both hosting and guesting can serve different brand purposes, like different goals. Absolutely. Starting your own podcast is really fun. I think I have done it many, many times, as you can hear from my story, but it can take a long time to build an audience. And not everyone wants to go that path. On the flip side, being a guest is an incredible way to leverage someone's audience, to bring your value, to bring your wisdom to someone else without having to like start your own media company. You're just being brought on to have a conversation. So I want to go over today what is going to work for you, why you might want to think about starting your own show, why you might want to think about being a guest. And of course, if you're new to our world, we teach you how to position yourself and your brand effectively to be an incredible guest on podcasts. And we're not just talking about getting interviewed on like your friend's show. We're teaching you how to pitch shows and podcasts, which bigger ones are used to being pitched all the time. So this is beyond the Facebook groups. This is beyond those like spammy posts of I want to interview 5 people. These are shows that have hundreds to thousands of downloads, and we want to show you how to actually do that. So let's start with benefits of starting your own show. Now, I know that this is not for everyone. I think some people listening to this could even be like, I'm not interested in that. That doesn't sound like fun to me. But here are some of the reasons why you might want to actually start your own show. And I know for me, when I thought about starting all of my interview series, like I loved the idea of being able to curate my own content, who I wanted on, what I wanted to talk about, what I thought would be helpful for the audience. And the biggest thing when you have your own show is you're able to have full creative control, right? Like you choose what you talk about. And when we talk about PR in general, having your own show is your own digital real estate. Like you own that conversation. You are the one where you hold the microphone. You're going to choose the content you talk about. You're going to choose like what goes on and what does not go on onto your podcast and onto your show. You choose the message, you choose the topics. So it's really where you get control of your brand voice. And of course, there are ways that you can do this when you're on other people's platforms. But like that is probably the biggest thing. You have full creative control, and you get to regularly put out content on topics you probably love. Like I remember having and getting to interview some incredible people. So one of my like biggest wins with my show She Builds Empire was with a YouTuber that I have been following for years. Okay, her channel is a fitness channel and it's called Nourish Move Love, and her name is Lindsay Baumgren. Now, she has probably 500,000 subscribers on YouTube at this point. I think she had like 230 when I interviewed her, 230,000, by the way. And I actually cold pitched her. I said, hey, like, I love what you're doing. I'm interested in interviewing you on my show. Here are past guests I've had on. So you can also like use the same strategies that we teach inside of our masterminds and our PR communities so that you can actually get guests on your shows too, which is really, really fun and totally possible. But that was huge because I got to, have someone who was a far bigger name, in my opinion, than me. And I got to bring them onto my platform. I've also been a Kundalini yoga teacher for, gosh, I don't even know how long, years at this point. And I've been part of numerous Kundalini yoga communities. And Hudman was someone who I found in one of my Kundalini yoga communities. And I wanted to interview her on my show. And like, yeah, she had a much bigger following than me. So you really do, when you have a platform, you have an asset. You literally are your own media channel. And What I have found that's, like, super interesting to me is, like, not everyone utilizes the strategy of guesting on podcasts. So, the people that I actually invited on the show, sometimes although they were so much bigger in my mind, they actually hadn't done many interviews, and I was like, "Oh my god, swoon, this is fantastic." So, anyway, you get to really build your own brand authority by bringing guests on, by having conversations, by holding your own microphone, by curating your own content, and you start to grow a loyal audience and a fan base and a community and people who are going to be listening to your show every Monday when you put out an episode. And when you miss an episode, they're going to be like, "Ah, shucks, like why aren't you here this week? Like I'm really missing you." And I am like that as a podcast listener. Like I am loyal to a T. Lydia always thinks it's so funny because I'm obsessed with the show My First Million. It's like such a bro show, which is why I love it because I think like men can really teach us a lot about business, and we can obviously teach them a lot about business. So, anywho, I listen to the show quite religiously. They put, I think, like 2 episodes out a week, and I am waiting for my podcast app every single week when a new episode comes out because I'm like, oh, I want to like go on my walk with my dog and listen to the interview. So you create loyalty. And when you create loyalty in this way, especially because podcasts are free, like people can download this content, they can listen to it anytime. The only exchange is value. And what you can do from there is start building an email list. So, mostly if you're listening to this, like you already have an email list, you're using some sort of email platform, and it's not Gmail, guys. You're not using Gmail to build an email list. That's not how it works. Um, but you can offer freebies, you can offer downloads, you can do host workshops, you can start to promote things to an engaged audience who already trust you. And that tends to convert way better when you have trust, right? Of course, we know this. And last but not least, with having your own show, you also can really deepen your relationships with those you have on the show. I have been a relationship focused business person since the day that I started. Okay. I remember asking my dad, who's been an entrepreneur for my entire life, has built a very, very successful business. And I asked him, "What do you attribute to your business success?" He said two things: actually caring about people and my employees and my team members and my clients, like from a human level. And then number two, building relationships. So I took that advice, I ran with it. Relationships were like the lifeblood of my business, and they still are. So I like to learn about someone. So if you come onto the show, I want to see how I can help you. Like, who can I connect you with? How can I do and just kind of give back to you and pour into you, like as a thank you for just like getting to know me and being here. So we actually, with Visibility Era, we have 70 plus episodes, probably 80 by the time you listen to this on the show. And we actually host private networking events that are free for our past guests because we've met them, but our community hasn't met them. And we're like, we want to connect you to everyone in our circle. So fantastic for networking. And last thing I'll say here is podcasts are great for content loops where you can link them. We actually embed all of our episodes into blog posts as pins on Pinterest, on YouTube. So everything is circulating. We have multiple points of entry into our brand and our business, which is fantastic. So you might be like, okay, she's definitely team start your own podcast. Now, I wouldn't say that. Like, if you're a person who doesn't like the behind the scenes, because there is, okay, it's time consuming. It really, really is. There's production work. There is a lot of commitment that goes into hosting and running your own show. And likely in the beginning, you are not making any money from this. You are not monetizing this yet. Like, you don't have enough listeners yet. You probably don't have enough listeners to do sponsorships or brand deals. There are always ways to be creative with that, but this approach might not be for everyone. Like you might be like, I do not want to have my own show. And that is why I don't know the stats on it. I could pull it up. Most shows, we have a lot of, we pay for a couple of apps that help us see the emails and like how many people are actually listening to the shows and the episodes and yada, yada, yada. A lot of shows are on hiatus or are inactive because people start and just like do not have the drive to keep it going, especially if they're not seeing the rewards. So I wouldn't recommend this if you're not in it for the long game. I'd also recommend at this point, like having something that people really, really want to listen to, especially if like you don't have an audience starting out. So it might not be for you. Now, let's shift gears into why being a guest on a podcast, so someone else's show, might actually be a better choice for you. Of course, I believe in like the tandem approach and like doing both. However, you can see that starting your own podcast, there's like potential cost also involved in starting your own podcast because you might end up paying an editor, which I've done in the past. So, being a guest on other people's platforms. This is one of the most incredible things that you could do for your business. Now, I'm telling you this out of personal experience too. Like, not just because our business does help people and train them and teach them on how to do this, but because of the benefits of being a guest. So, we always talk about other people's audiences. OPA. I've done so many videos on OPA, other people's audiences. There is nothing better than you getting in front of new people, and especially if you have thought through what kind of shows you want to be on, because the audiences should align. They usually do. You're able to reach new audiences, new listeners, new potential leads, new potential clients without the heavy lift of having your own show or running ads or any of those things. Like, this is one of the best ways that you can do it. And I remember having guests on my podcast, and this has happened for Visibility Era as well. Having guests on my podcast who literally sent me a message after and were like, Bridget, thank you so much for having me on the show. I actually got 2 new clients after someone listened to the episode. So, how incredible is that? Okay, you get to share your expertise. You get to share your story. You get to, and as Lydia says this so well, you get to sell without selling because telling your story, sharing your expertise is a like surefire way for someone to usually either like be like, I'm not into this person at all, like I'm out, which is fantastic, or be like, oh my God, I love what they're saying. Like, I want to know more about them. I want to binge all the episodes where they're talking. I want to binge all their content. I'm going to follow them on Instagram. I'm going to download whatever they have. I'm going to buy their products. I'm going to inquire about their services, yada, yada, yada. So you get to go on other people's shows without like creating content all the time. Just closing this light. It's a little bad lightning. And you don't need to be maintaining a regular podcast schedule. So Lydia and I have episodes that come out once a week. And, that's something that's like part of our weekly to do. We have a structure, we have an SOP, we have a formula of how that happens every single week. But that is something that you need to be like doing every single week. So when you're a guest, you don't need to do the heavy lifting. Like, you might do the heavy lifting by sending the pitches, which is like step one, especially for bigger shows. But step two is you showing up and doing a good job on the actual interview. And step three is you sharing it with your audience and leveraging that press win and that interview so that you can show your audience, hey, I'm someone who talks about this. You don't have the commitment of like needing to do this weekly. You don't have a schedule. This is really, really good if you're busy. If you are someone who's busy in your business, but you know that getting in front of other platforms is crucial for you, this is what you should be doing. Now, there's also added SEO and just like social proof benefits in general. So, when you are interviewed on a podcast, you have things like Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts. These are, in a way, I'm not going to say they're search engines, but like they function in that way similarly when you type things onto Google. So, if you type in my name or Lydia's name, I guarantee a podcast or two is going to come up. And that's because these are highly trafficked sites. So, they're pulling that data and then delivering that to whatever query someone's typing in on Google or another search engine. So you appearing on those also gives you that third-party endorsement, which we talk about all the time at Visibility on Purpose. You want those third-party endorsements. So being on podcasts as a guest, it boosts your credibility, it boosts your trust. You show people like, I am a business owner who does X, Y, and Z. The biggest challenge here is that, yes, you do need to pitch yourself, right? So, one of the easiest things that we teach at Visibility and Purpose in our masterminds, our PR Visibility Mastermind, is to set aside 1 to 2 hours a week to pitch yourself to podcasts, to do all of your PR efforts like in a scheduled time. Once you have a really solid pitch, you're able to use that for usually multiple shows. We always recommend that when you are pitching shows, you do listen to the show. Like, that is probably Rule number 1 that you don't wanna break, I will never forget when Lydia and I, who run a podcast about visibility and PR and media and securing media opportunities, and we had a magician apply to the show. We were like, "How did we get here? Like, that doesn't quite make sense to us," but maybe he thought it was invisibility era, not sure. Haha, not sure. So at the end of the day, you need to bring this into like your structure, your routines, and make this something that you do because there is a little bit of effort involved. But at the same time, it is way less effort than starting your own show, especially if that's like not what speaks to you. So at the end of the day, both of these options are incredible. And I would always recommend that it's like an and strategy. So whether you want to be a guest, whether you want to start your own show. I would never ever sleep on being a guest though on others. Maybe go back and forth if you want to have your own show just based on what we've talked about here. So, at the end of the day, building your brand, you can do that as a guest on shows, you can do that with your own show. Hosting your own show is going to require more time. Guesting is generally going to be more flexible because you're going to be able to pitch yourself and just schedule the show when you're actually free and available. Hosting your own show lets you build a community because people are going to come back week after week and be like, "Hey, what's up, Bridget? What are you doing?" All that. Whereas being a guest will broaden your reach. So if your goal is like getting you in front of new audiences, I would go guesting 1000%. So that is kind of the end of what we talked about here today. I do believe like the answer can be both, it can be or, but I wouldn't sleep on the guesting. I think that that's really, really important. But let us know, what do you think of like episodes like this? I'm curious if anyone also who listens to the show pretty regularly, like, have you thought about starting your own podcast? Are you actively pitching yourself? And I want to just chime in, don't just be in the Facebook groups because a lot of the times those shows are really, really small. And while that's great to get started, if you really want to move the needle in terms of getting in front of the right audience, you want shows that have a little bit of a bigger reach. So we can show you some of the tools that we use to find those numbers, which I think are really, really helpful. And let us know what you think. Leave a rating, leave a review. We would love to hear it. And just thank you for listening to another episode. This has been so fun today.